I want us to kind of take a moment of reflection. I'm going to ask you a few rhetorical questions, and I just want you to think about them. I'm not going to call people out, because I know if I were sitting where y'all were sitting, I'd be like, please don't call me. So you just take a moment to think about it. So if your early education was based in the U.S., I want you to ask yourself, what was it like when you learned about Black history? Did you think that, the curriculum was dynamic and interesting? Did you think that maybe you got a really clear picture of what it meant to be a Black American in the U.S.? Or did you feel like it was basic? Did you feel like, it wasn't really cohesive, there were just like a lot of moving parts, and like somehow Black people just became Black people in the U.S.? If you're anything like me, the latter is true. If you ask 13-year-old Zhuri about Black history, she will tell you that there were some slaves at some point, and then 3 years later MLK came, and then, you blinked and there was like Malcolm X, I guess. And then people played sports. No, people definitely played sports, and there was jazz. And if they were Muslim, they were almost always Nation of Islam, but they were not the ones that were doing jazz. Like, that was a different section, you know what I mean? Like, there was never any overlap. That's 13-year-old Zhuri, though. That's not me. Right? So if that was your experience, I want to validate you in that. Like, that is not isolated. So I want to provide research for every claim I state, because I'm 23 years old, and I want you guys to feel confident in what I'm going to say to you. So the curriculum frameworks for teaching Black history breaks down like this. So from kindergarten to second grade, you kind of learn about like basic belief systems and cultures of Africans and Black Americans. So this might look like, Kwanzaa. We learn what Kwanzaa is, and we might learn all of the countries in Africa, just like the names. And then a few years later, you still think that Africa's a country. From 3rd to 5th grade, you learn about like the historical and physical developments of the African continent. So you might learn about Timbuktu, you might learn about Egypt, very broad, general understandings of what happened, before I can even conceptualize time. 6th through 8th grade, you learn about broad global connections between African American experiences and what that means is slavery. We learned that we came over on boats, we worked, that's how they would frame it, and that was the end. And then from 9th through 12th grade, you learn about the contributions of Black and African people. So you might learn about MLK and Ruby Bridges, and I don't know if this is like a Midwest thing, but every year they show us about like the kids getting sprayed with a hose and everyone being excited to go to jail, like with like no context whatsoever. So not very cohesive, not very granular, and no continuity whatsoever. You probably learn about Black history within like 3 days out of the entire year. And what it really just does is acknowledge that Black people exist. But as a Black person, the Black people in this audience, we do so much more than just exist. And honestly, even just them acknowledging that we exist is like really huge, because there's not a national curriculum for how we teach Black history. I found that out this weekend. And so this leaves just like a whole lot of room for misinterpretation and alternative facts about who we are and where we came from. So, how does this connect to Hajj, right? So Hajj was a Sunni Muslim, and he was also a jazz giant. And so his story in many ways reflects like the multifacetedness of Black people in history that we don't learn about, specifically Black American Muslims. And so when Professor Lowe asked me to give this talk, I was like, he is the perfect person to kind of bridge all of the brainchild of Black history into one moment. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to break down the understanding of him as a Sunni Muslim, then I'm going to go into him as a jazz giant, and I'm going to put the two together. And like I said, I will be sure to, have some research to back up my statements. So first, let's talk about him as a Muslim. So he's a Sunni Muslim, and as you've heard Salim and Brian mention, his family was a-religious. So you often hear about Black Americans converting from Christianity to Islam. That's almost the only narrative that we hear. But that is not Haroon's story, and I think it would be naive to think that that's every Black person's story who is Muslim. So his parents didn't go to church. His parents were not Christian, but the reason was because they, like many other black people, were disillusioned with Christianity. His parents felt that church was used as a tool by white people to keep African Americans under control. This is not a new idea. This is not his family was just radical. Like this is an idea that's wasn't just held back then, but it's also held today. And so he, as you've heard, connected with a family friend who goes by the name of Mr. Musa. And Mr. Musa was not, trying to indoctrinate him or do anything like that, something we always hear. Mr. Musa was just the kind, family friend. And Haroon really fell in love with his influence, fell in love with the kindness that he showed his mother and his sisters and the people around him, and that is how his love for Islam started to become fostered. Which, like I said, this is not what we learn in history books. Generally when we talk about Islam and black Americans in the same sentence, it is almost always going to be centered around the Nation of Islam. This is problematic. Because the Nation of Islam and Islam, as we've heard, are extremely different in a plethora of ways. Outside of the fundamental differences between the two, like Nation of Islam is a religious political association and Islam is a belief. I want to be clear, this is not what is the word? Oh my gosh. This is not like a critique on the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam is extremely important to black history. What I'm saying is that if we only focus black religiousness, black spirituality around resistance and rebellion, we decide that black people only do things in retaliation. And that's not okay. So, Haroon decided to become a Sunni Muslim because he found a connection with God, he found a connection with the person that he loves. So, like I said, I'm going to back up everything I said. So, Pew Research Center found that today, of black Muslims, 2 in every 100 black Muslims identify with the Nation of Islam. In contrast, majority of black Muslims, 52%, identify as Sunni Muslims. So why do we only hear about black people being from Nation of Islam? Which requires more research. So, now that we have kind of broken that down, perhaps you can say that this is due to the presence of Malcolm X, or maybe the ways in which Malcolm X and Nation of Islam have been poorly taught in the American school system. Maybe this is just because there is a bit of an effort to demonize African Americans and Muslims, so we put the two together and said, why not? But these stories matter too. So next I'm going to get into how he is a jazz giant. So when I say jazz giant, I don't mean he just played jazz, I mean he was that guy, right? He was playing with Billie Holiday. I don't know if y'all know about Billie Holiday, but I knew about Billie Holiday before I knew about Billie Holiday. You know what I mean? He was playing with Charlie Parker, Charles Mingus, all of these incredible people as a trombonist. So he linked up with saxophonist T. Williams, and he was like, look man, you're good, you're doing great, but you should learn Yardbird Suite, which is like Charlie Parker and some other people's big thing. That is their claim to fame, along with bebop. And he practiced it, he got really good, and that's how he ended up playing with all these greats. So I wanted to highlight 2 people in particular that he found, to just really speak to him and be near and dear to his heart. So the first person, like I mentioned, is Billie Holiday. For those who don't know a lot about Billie Holiday, she is what I would call an accidental activist, right? Because black people can just talk about their experiences and then they're activists. And that's what I feel like Billie Holiday did with her song, Strange Fruit. For those that don't know, strange fruit is kind of a metaphor about the strange fruit, i.e. bodies hanging from trees. And it was a really big deal. Police will follow her to her concerts. It was a whole thing. I think there's a show about it on Hulu if you want to look at it. He was enamored with Billie Holiday. He loved Billie Holiday and was so in love with her that he would take any, not romantically in love, but really enamored with her. That he would take any opportunity to play with her, or even be in the background. Next, there's Charlie Parker. Charlie Parker is the main creator of bebop, and then also Yardbird Suite, just really big guy. And the thing about Charlie Parker that is often mentioned when you learn about him is he had a really bad drug addiction and alcohol use. And so I highlight these two people to say this. Hajj Haroon, which is not a perspective that we get, did not condemn or shy away from Billie Holiday or Charlie Parker, regardless of their shortcomings or because of what the media, tried to portray them as. Hajj Haroon states that for Charlie Parker's case, he was doing all these things because it helped kill the pain of the realities of being a Negro in America. And so I thought that part was really incredible because, like I said earlier, when you learn about Black history, it does not seem to overlap. Like when I learned about Charlie Parker, I was so upset. I was like, how could he? He was like the best of the best, and that's because it's not put in the context of he was doing his thing, but also as a Black man during a time where stuff was just not okay. And we don't hear this narrative of Black people supporting other Black people in this way, of not immediately going and condemning and being upset when things don't work out. And so he even goes to say that, like, he saw these types of people as his jazz heroes. Despite their shortcomings, they were still spoke people for the race. They showed that even though things were bad, look at how incredible they still are. So, I would be lying if I didn't, at least talk about the glory and fun part of jazz, because it's jazz. So, jazz, in many ways, was kind of Black people's way of being free for a while. In many ways, it was kind of a place to go when things got too rough because you knew it would be around other Black people, like-minded. Maybe you could dance, maybe you could sing, I don't know, do whatever you want. It's jazz. It's Harlem. And so the issue is when we don't put, civil rights in conjunction with these booming times, it makes it seem like, at this time Black people just wanted to have fun. But that's not what it was. We were in many ways seeking refuge. We were in many ways trying to rebuild ourselves when the day-to-day was tearing us down. So I say all that to say this. Hajj Haroon made a really good point about how easy it is for outside forces to demonize our champions. And so when we teach these things out of context, it's so easy to demonize our champions, and this promotes the idea that Black Americans are responsible for all of the things that happen to them. Because if Charlie Parker could be, all that and still do all those things, oh no, he's no good. And so he really asserts these were not frivolous mishaps. This was just a way to kind of coping with the crippling reality that was happening to us during these times. And so I'm so thankful that I was able to read Hajj Haroon's perspective, simply because it gave me an idea of what it was actually like being a Black person at that time, hearing these things about Charlie Parker and Billie Holiday. So next, I want to point to the fact that jazz also was a way for Black people to travel, which is not something that we learn about. These big jazz giants, they would go to different parts of the world. They would learn about themselves as Black people. They would learn, immerse themselves in Islam. And this goes back to the idea that we don't have a cohesive understanding. So we may know him as Charlie Parker. We may know him as Art Blakey. But he has his, own name in Islam. They are Muslims too. But those parts of their histories are never put forth. We just know them as these jazz musicians. And it's similar to Hajj Haroon, right? He was this jazz giant, but on the other side, he also traveled to various places, achieving personal growth, exposure, becoming immersed in Islam, really learning who he was. His name originally was John Mancebo Lewis, and now he is Hajj Haroon. Perspectives that we don't get. So to wrap it all up, to put it all together like I promised, as an American Muslim, Hajj Haroon was not an anomaly, and that is the really important thing to take from my session in this talk. He was exceptional simply because he was just that guy, but he having these multifaceted identities is not a fluke. That was not just unique to him. Like I said, Art Blakey, Charlie Parker, people have similar experience. We just don't learn about them. So all Black people can't fit in one box or one category, even though that's what you learn that they fit into, you know, when you're starting out in learning. So I couldn't really figure out how to wrap this session up. So as I was reading his book, he said this really beautiful quote that I would love to share with you all. He's talking about the bebop dancers and how, you know, they contributed, but we don't hear their names. I am one of the vanishing breed who have been lost in the anonymity of cultural history. It is the duty of the historian to destroy pernicious myth and create new scenarios in the pages of the text, heard on revisionist thought and research, and in the process, create the basis of new myths. I remember Malcolm X admonishing a crowd in Harlem on the virtue of destroying the myth of the Negro, and taking the initiative to create new myths based on sounder truths. This truth, of course, would be based on the participants' experience, the dark-skinned dancers who tiptoed along the continuum of the Black experience, not the quasi-truth of the former slave masters, who for some strange reason are still trying to explain us away with radical assumptions and just plain lies. So what does it mean? As we swim through this age of Aquarius, or you know, the age of knowledge, it's time we start to tell the stories of these great people. We acknowledge that, you know, who they were fully, not just the parts that fit into certain categories that make sense in certain parts of time. You know, it would have been extremely easy for me to come up here and tell you, yeah, he experienced racism, and he talked about how white girls would go into the jazz spots, and I could have said that, but aren't we tired of hearing that? I am. Aren't we tired of listening to Black trauma all the time? I am. So I wanted to highlight the parts of Black history that are not always highlighted, like all of the presenters have and will do